Okay, alright. Another random event with your host, the randomizer. And today is just another day. Some would say another day in paradise. Well, actually, that sounds familiar. Another day in paradise. That's a song by Phil Collins. And actually, I like that song. Uh, it's just another day in paradise. And the thing in that song, one of the main points of that song was to talk about how we may ignore the people that have less, the homeless people, and we just go about our business, but our normal lives, or it's really a paradise for those people. And I think that's what the song is based on. The main message of that song. And that's what I want to discuss actually, because I have that premise or the conclusion that's kind of wrong. Because imagine, no matter who you are, even the homeless person, let's say in LA or New York or Philadelphia or any city for that matter, there's always going to be somebody else that is much worse off. And from that person's point of view, the homeless person in LA, that's at least in the vicinity of civilization, is living in paradise. But the question then becomes, do we really want to use the other person maybe in the war-torn, do we really want to use the other person in the war-torn zone, for example, as a reason why we're living in paradise when in fact we ourselves, we are homeless? So that's an extreme. But the basic point is that living in, using the expression of living in paradise simply because you're better off than somebody else doesn't make you live in paradise, right? I mean, the fact that a homeless person can barely get a meal a day, one meal in one day, versus me that can go to work and feed my family, but we all have to live in one room and have to keep the temperature low in the wintertime because we cannot afford to have heat. I'm not living in paradise. The fact that the homeless person may wish to be in my position because they have steady food, which is it's much easier to deal with the cold than to deal with hunger. Fact still remains for me, though. I'm not living in paradise because, if that's the case, then we may as well, then just about everybody in America should be very, very happy that they don't live like the poorest countries in the world. But they're not, and they shouldn't be, because people's problems are individual problems. And it's not about what I have or what I don't have. It's actually how I feel. So even if a person has a lot and they don't feel like they have a lot, that pain is there. And it's the pain that really matters. The pain may not be justified, by some standards or objectively even. But nonetheless, the pain is still there. And trying to convince somebody it's not, it's different. Why do you think a lot of people that had a lot of money and lost it all, in the stock market or whatever, they end up killing themselves? We normal people might say, oh, okay, so we had 60 million and we lost 59.5 million. We still got $500,000 left. That's a lot. That's a lot. But for those people who lost that, they are forced to change their lifestyle, right? From where they live, who to interact with, what they can get on demand. And all that stuff just affects their ability to function normally. And they can't handle that. And so therefore they feel the pain, and eventually they feel they have to end their lives. Actually, I remember way back when there was this story with Enron, and I forget the guy's name, Jeffrey something, but one of those people that had a whole lot of money, and I think they were accused of, this particular person was accused of stealing millions or whatever, something like that. But at some point, I remember them interviewing the wife, and they were wondering, whatever money that they had, and I think they had this legally. What happened to all the money? Like I don't know, maybe it was like $2 million, and now it's all gone within a year. And she was just saying that the lifestyle that they were accustomed to required that amount of expenditure. And of course, we can sit here and say, well, it doesn't. And objectively, it's not required to survive. But the point is, if somebody feels like that, then whatever pain they're going to experience from not having those things that we might, find as not necessary, if to them it's necessary, then they can't live without it, and they may not be rational enough to say, well, let me curtail my spending to stretch the amount. It's almost kind of like somebody's trying to extend their ration their food. I mean, only the well-disciplined people may be able to do that. You just end up not being able to do it. So, like I said, the can't look at the objective side, right? Because objectively, the biological requirements is one thing. We can always say, well, this is excess. They just got to learn to live with it. But from a person feeling that pain, that's that. It's something that we really can't say who should feel the pain and who should not. And so that's the thing that I think that forms this disparity between the rich and the poor, and everybody has to deal with their problem appropriately. And I would more or less just leave it at that, because that doesn't get into the rights and wrongs and of who can do what and who can do this. People just have to be able to do whatever they can to maintain is like a peace of mind in the brain. And if it's such as it's going to cost you a lot to have peace of mind in the brain, well, then that's the exposure you're taking. You're exposing yourself to having to find some way, some means, somehow to get the necessary amount of money, as opposed to the person who requires less. But either way, I respect both parties, as long as you don't do any kind of a criminal activity to achieve that end, because that's just bad. Talking about criminals, that's the other thing I want to talk about. Criminals. The other day, what's that? 2 days ago, the ex-prime minister of Japan was assassinated. As somebody says, for an important person is assassinated. For the regular folks, it's just murder. Either way, he was killed intentionally, and this was done with a homemade gun. So suddenly, there's this large outpour, at least in certain circles, about, using this incident as to say, you see, no matter what you do about guns, no matter what you do, criminals will find a way to get a gun. So therefore, there is no point in the whole idea of not giving access, trying to ban guns from the general public is stupid. Now, me personally, it is what it is. So I don't know. I don't think that that the guns people use should be banned, but it's not based. But it's not based on necessarily on self defense or not. It's more or less based on whether or not the way I look at it is whether or not. Well, I look at it for I base it on two things. A, whether or not the device itself is inherently dangerous, and number two, whether or not the misuse of it would cause grave harm to society. But that's per incident, not in total. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that uh, whatever things there are in your house, it should be in such a way that this particular thing, if the main thing is self defense, then that's fine. But there has to, but it has to be as such that if somebody does in fact misuse it, that single incident doesn't cause grave, a lot of harm to society. And this is where obviously it's subjective, because what's a major harm, right? But the main reason why I bring this up is the argument is that if even if you ban it, criminals will still have it. And that argument, using this stuff for guns, is is ridiculous, because that argument can be used for any kind of weapon. I mean, so it's like, well, there's no need to ban grenades, because clearly people can have that. And forget about grenades. There's no need to ban uh, there's no need to ban aerial devices that drop explosives. I mean, the list can go on, because all those things can be built. I mean, a matter of fact, you had that one guy who built the equivalent of a tank, or he converted a tank from an earth moving machine, like an earth moving machine. So that was done, right. But so because people can do that, does that mean that we should now because people can do that, does that mean that it doesn't make we shouldn't have laws that ban private citizens or any person to own a tank or any other kind of vehicles? I mean, or the matter of fact, there are certain chemicals that you can make at home, and those chemicals are banned. And I think it's a good thing that they are banned, regardless of the fact that you can make it at home. So I think that you know using this, because they're going to find a way, no matter, even if you banned it, as a justification why it shouldn't be banned, is just a ridiculous argument. Now, like I said earlier before, I don't have a problem with private citizens owning guns, but let's come up with a better argument, not this ridiculous. Well, even if you ban it, they'll still find a way, because that's true for many, many, many things that are banned. Trust me, there are a lot of things that people can do, and if they weren't banned because they'll do it anyway, we'd be in some serious trouble. So that's an argument in my book that doesn't really fly. But at the same time, you do want to give people the freedom to go ahead and express. Have the freedom to defend themselves, which is, I think, what most people are concerned about, because it seems like, at least in the United States, the Second Amendment is concerned, or at least in that same passage, it talks about bearing arms, and it talks about militia, and it talks about government. So a lot of people interpret that, which I think is probably correct to some extent, anyways, that it is about the people protecting themselves from a tyrannic government. Um, yes, and so therefore, I think that has to be something that people shouldn't be denied. On the other hand, there is a limit. There should be a limit. So therefore, we're not in a situation where one person can cause a whole lot of harm and go on a rampage, right? Because I mean, there's one thing about having an assault rifle, which to some extent may or may not be necessary, but I'm not really here to say it is or it's not. But you take that and you compare that with, let's just say, an armored vehicle complete with chemical weapons and stuff. Now that's different, because the point is, it's different. One of the reasons why you wouldn't want a private person, to own that, is because that particular person now has the ability to do a lot of harm. But you can argue that, well, that's what the police is there to stop people, right? It's the same way you got somebody with a gun and the police got guns, and it still works out. You don't ban the gun, because the police will just have guns themselves too. But the thing is, what you end up with is a citizens' arms race, right? And that's what you don't want, because at some point, for sure, the private sector will outspend any police department, right? So somebody in the private sector will be able to arm themselves more than the average police, not even the average, sometimes even the best police department can do. And so you don't want an arm race. It's one of the reasons why bulletproof vests are illegal in some states and in many countries. It's because what you don't want to do is start this arms race between citizens and police, because that means that the police have to have bullets that can penetrate the armor, and then as you start to increase the lethalness of that, you're going to run into all sorts of problems, right? You have to recalibrate and recalculate your training and stuff, because you have to take into account now bullets having the ability to go through things that you didn't think they were going to go through earlier. So that makes the whole thing a mess. So at the end, what I'm really trying to say is that private citizens should have guns if they want to, but let's not use the argument that even if you ban it, they'll still be able to get a hold of it, or even make one their own. Let's not use that argument, because while it's true, that's true for many, 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 many things that we do ban, and nobody has a problem with that. So let's just come up with a better argument, because the basis of people owning guns is already sound enough. Let's not add ridiculous arguments just to kind of like make the issue understandable to people who are not critical. Let's not water down our arguments just so that way people who are not good at critical thinking will accept that. I mean, that's the thing with in a democracy, that's one of the things that people always try to cater to the lowest denominator, just because if you do that, then you get the majority vote, and when you get the majority vote, you're in. And that's the problem, or one of the problems with democracy. Which brings me to my third random event, or random sub-event, if you will, which is, yes, this democracy that's based on majority. That's fine. It works out to some extent, right? But one of the things that people will always talk about, especially now, people are talking about, oh yeah, how, back in the day, or whenever that day was, things were much better, and people did this, corporations paid their taxes, and politicians didn't lie as much, and so on and so forth, and they were fair. But now things are just going downhill. It's like, well, maybe that's true, but that's not even the point. The thing is, like, it shouldn't be surprising, right? It's because the way the democracy works, I mean, the way the way democracy specifically works is inherently unstable. It has to be. Because if you think about this, and this is specifically, normally I don't compare democracy with authoritarian because I don't think those things are not opposites, if you will. But the media loves to do that. So let's just take them on that for a second. Um, the democracy has to be unstable. Why? It's because you have a particular environment, whatever the environment is. Let's say, let's go back to the guns stuff again, because we're already on that topic. And let's just say um, people don't want people want violence reduced. Some politicians, the loudest ones, convince them that the answer to that is to disarm the public. Okay, public then votes for the person that's going to disarm them. Okay, so that's the beginning of the cycle. So now, before, in the environment that the public was voting, was an environment where the public wasn't disarmed. But now the public votes to disarm. I mean, to vote for the politician that's going to effectively, institute disarmament of the public. So that goes through. Now, the public is disarmed. But here's the thing. The thing is now, as time goes by, we do the whole circle and voting things comes about. Now the voters are in a different environment. In this environment, they're disarmed. Oh, I almost lost the microphone. In this environment, they are disarmed. So whatever consequences comes with disarmament, whether or not it's safety, maybe, maybe not, or more violence, maybe, maybe not. But the point is, the environment is now definitely different. So what happens is, in this different environment, something else might bubble to the top, right? And let's just say maybe what bubbles to the top, like I said, maybe it's more violence or maybe it's less violence. If it's more violence, then you can easily see where somebody might convince people, well, yeah, maybe you should go ahead and you should we should have more guns, or actually better yet, since a lot of times you really can't roll stuff back that easily, so maybe the answer to trying to still keep people safe, because remember, the whole idea is it's not about guns and not guns. The whole point is about keeping people safe. So the first round is we try to keep people safe by disarming the public, so therefore that nobody would do random stuff. But let's just say that didn't work. The next election cycle that comes around, or the next people that try to get into power and make things better, it's going to be hard pressed for them to say, well, let's reintroduce guns. But what they will say, well, let's give the police more guns, or let's do harsher sentences. And that is going to make you safer because it's going to be a deterrent. And depending on how people look at it, how they're convinced or how they're tricked, they may vote for that. So now we go from public not armed, police more armed, and harsher sentences. So that goes around. So now election cycle comes again. Now we're in yet another environment. So now that third cycle around, let's just say the violence is still lingering. Well, then what do? Maybe you start banning certain substances that you feel are either fueling the violence or somehow related, however way you force the issue, are related to the cause of violence, right? Maybe have you become tougher on drugs and make more on illegal drugs, and you make more legal drugs illegal or requiring a prescription. You do that, and maybe you require more drug tests in more businesses. Keep the violence down. So that's going to cause inconvenience and stigma to certain people. So that gets passed by politicians that's pimping that stuff, basically. Environment changes again. We come back to cycle, the violence is still happening, right? So now maybe you're requiring background checks or IDs for people going into any public building, and you can see how this is going. The point is that the environment, unless the environment is stable, unless the outcome is stable, you're always going to have the cycle where people try to achieve this particular goal, but the achievement of that goal, the reaching of that goal itself, will change the environment in such a way that we're no longer dealing with the initial environment where we made those where we made those particular actions. It's kind of like when people talk about when they passed the cigarette banning cigarettes in bars and stuff. There used to be kids outside. Well, not even kids, but people outside this like some bars that they're out there dealing and doing their thing. So normally when you're in the bar, you look out, you'd see them go back and forth, just in and out, and that's how they were potentially doing something, especially since a lot of people stereotype them. But then when cigarettes were banned, everybody of all walks of life went out and came back, because they were most of the time, or some of the times, they were out there just trying to get a smoke. But what that did was it gave a cover for those people who were going back and forth to meet their customers and do their deals, right? So you have one particular law has these consequences, which changes the environment, which causes more changes. So in that situation, things will always get unstable. Democracy it's a thing that starts off with a pure intention, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. It has to be, because the point is, every time there's a problem, usually not change in culture solves it, but legislation solves it, which means that the underlying impulse is still there. It's just being held back by laws, right? And you're gonna have certain amount of people in the public which aren't going to be deterred by that law. And what happens is society reacts with more laws, right? And usually, when these laws are implemented, they almost never go away. They're always enforced. So essentially, it's like you have in the back in the old days when you when you have hard drives that over time, over usage, they become fragmented and fragmented and fragmented and fragmented, because every time you delete stuff, you really don't delete it, and then when the file is saved, it cannot be saved in one contiguous sector. It's got to be broken up into multiple sectors, and then when that gets deleted, then you have certain parts that are free, certain parts that are not, and then new stuff gets added on. Maybe a small file can fit in one of those sectors, or a bigger file has to be broken up into multiple sectors. So eventually, over time, the disk drive becomes slow because your seek head has to jump all these various sectors to piece together one file. And the only way to solve that is to just, do a defragmentation, which basically tries to reposition all the sectors to be contiguous, and that takes forever. Or you do what usually is the fastest way to do it. You reformat your hard drive. That's right. You reformat your hard drive, and that's what's going to happen with all democracies. At some point, there's just going to be a reset. We don't have time to augment our laws. We only have time to write new ones. Right? Compare that with authoritarian. They can balance that, right? Because the thing is, no matter what the public feels, their laws is going to be to maintain a certain type of behavior, and that just gets enforced without taking in consideration of the public's opinion. And when you don't do that, that essentially breaks the cycle. Because no matter what I introduce, even though the environment obviously does change, but but it does change, but the people then cannot react to that change to then change the government. That would be the cycle. So that part is broken. So the government comes up with the rules, the environment changes, and it just stops there because the public cannot really affect the governing body, which would then react to the rules that just passed. So there is no response to the rules they've passed. So therefore, that works out. Um, but at the end of the day, a real authoritarian society is a dark society, right? It's like it's not a good place you want to be in. And normally I would stop here because I think I'm over my time that I planned, but I guess I'm still on the roll. The talking about the dark societies and stuff like that. Let's talk about dark matter. Dark matter. Dark matter. I'm not talking about dark meat like chicken and stuff. Dark matter. I mean, you hear about this a lot, and the people that talk about dark matter, the people that talk about um, the people that talk about dark matter, they don't really know much about it, and they talk about how scientists just make up stuff. They just, maybe the science is wrong. They don't want to accept it, and they just come up with dark matter. That's just ridiculous. If 90% or more, or 97%, whatever, of the universe is made up of this mysterious dark matter, then clearly your math is wrong. Because it's telling you it's already wrong. 97% or whatever is matter that you can't see, that you claim it's to be dark. But yeah, actually, let me see. Well, actually, what I'll do, because I just realized that this is going to be a much, much more complicated subject with dark matter. And we're already up to the 32-minute mark. But I'll just say this quick about dark matter. The thing is, people have to understand, dark matter is not matter. Dark matter is more like an action. We detect an action, and that action is called dark matter. It's not a thing. You can't use dark matter in your equations, right? Because it's not a thing. It's an observed phenomena. That's what it is. It's kind of like if I see lights in the sky, it's lights in the sky. Fact remains, there's lights in the sky. But I'm not going to use that light in the sky to explain anything. I can't use that light in the sky to explain how hot it is or how cold it is. It's just an explanation. I mean, it's just an observed phenomena or an observed anomaly. And that's all that is. And so everybody who's saying that scientists are using this as an excuse, that's not the case. So that's the gist of dark matter is being wrong. It's been given a bad name because I think I forgot what, some YouTuber wrote a video. I mean, did a video about how people are wasting a lot of energy trying to find dark matter, but that's not really what it's all about. It's much more complicated than that. It's an anomaly that we're trying to figure out what this anomaly is. And at some point when it's discovered, the word matter wouldn't even be on it. Because it may not even be matter. It just might be something totally different. So let's not get all crazy about it. But for now, it's at 34-minute mark, and I will do something more comprehensive about dark matter. It is a dark subject that some light needs to be shined on. Well, I am the randomizer, and I'm signing off for another random event on this Sunday, on this Sunday, July 10th, 2022.